So we're back here with my friend Bear, and it's been a great conversation so far. But I really want to learn, how did you end up here in Asheville, in Western North Carolina?
Well, after Larry and I had broken up, and Larry, you know, he had an idea of what he wanted his life to be, and I could not provide that for him.
Hmm.
Uh, and I always felt like we never got to say a proper goodbye. And after we broke up, I went through some pretty dark times and being homeless. My mother and father never knew about it.
Okay.
And for I was homeless for about 3 months. One time I almost froze to death. I had an apartment, but I couldn't afford the gas. But I was able to get a kerosene heater, and it was like 3 degrees below zero.
Oh.
And I was carrying that heater back to my apartment. My lungs almost froze. But I got in there with that kerosene heater and turned it on, and that was the best heat. And I heated, put a can of green beans on top of the kerosene, and I hadn't eaten like in 5 days. And that was the best tasting green beans I ever had in my life. So then I realized, I don't know how to say this without sounding so egotistical. I'll put it this way. Mother Nature had been kind to me in the right departments.
Okay.
So I was
Okay.
able to sell myself,
Okay.
and my clientele tended to be older guys. And I got to the point I became so jaded, I said, this is
Hmm.
no way to live.
Hmm.
And then, like the prodigal son, I'm going to mom and daddy's. And of course, they accepted me. And I came back home and I said, I've got to be around gay people, and Forest City was hardly the pride capital of Western. So I, through the underground newspaper, I learned of a group called Closer. And Closer was a gay support group. At one time, it was the longest running support group in North Carolina.
Okay.
And I think it stood for Community Liaison for Education and Reform.
Yes.
And it met at All Souls of Episcopal Church, one we used to call All Swells. And Joan Marshall, God rest her, Joan was an Episcopal deacon, and she was, I think, the first female deacon in their diocese. And she had begun to work with AIDS community.
Okay.
So Joan said,
Yeah.
why don't you come to Asheville? So I spent a couple of nights at their house, went to Closer. That's when I saw John and fell in love with him and decided to come back, having a clue what I was going to do. And this is when I got to re-meet Randy, who was the first person to have AIDS in Buncombe County, and got to work with the AIDS community. And I decided to stay. I will tell you this about Randy, but I learned he could be a pain in the butt. He really could be. But he was angry, and he should have been. A young man, his life being cut short.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I always called him little brother. He was always my little brother. Well, I got a message that he was dying. And I went to Mission Hospital where Randy was. This is hard for me to tell. They told me I had to put on a biohazard suit.
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
told them they could take the biohazard suit and cram it where the sun didn't shine. I was not going to do it. So I went in and Randy was unconscious. And I kept smelling. I asked this nurse, I said, what is that smell? She said, that's his liver. His liver is just dissipating. So I leaned over. She said, don't you know? I said, I do not need gloves. Let's get the hell out of here.
Right.
So I
Oh.
leaned over and I said, little brother, it's me. I said, I love you. And he started smiling. He understood. He heard me.
Oh.
I'll never forget that as long as I live. And I can still feel his presence. I talk to him almost every day. And it's like with Larry, my first lover, I never got to say goodbye. And one day I was looking online and there was his obituary. He had died like 9 years before. And I said, Larry, I never got to say goodbye to you. I said, I don't care what happened. I love you, I always will. And I'm not lying. There was this pressure starting on my chest, and I could
Oh.
feel somebody pressing on my chest. And I heard Larry say, I love you too.
That's beautiful.
And I talked to him. And but so I was in Asheville and I started to get active and I began to feel this call back to ministry. And then the city council elections came up. And I had been involved, I was the first, I'm told, clergy person to officiate at a same-gender wedding. In fact, it was at Cahoots, which was in scandals then.
Okay.
And the two women that wanted me to officiate, one of the women had been raised Pentecostal, God help her, and she said they wouldn't baptize me because I was
Oh,
I said, well, it's ridiculous.
right.
I'll baptize you. So we'll do it the week before the wedding. And Jimmy, who was a drag queen who worked at Cahoots, I said, Jimmy, we're going to have a baptism in the restaurant before it opens, if that's okay. He said, sure, what do you need? And I said, just a bowl and some water. Don't you need the holy water? Where does holy water come from? I said, the holy spigot. I said, holy water is just water that you blessed. So I baptized her, and then the next week we had a nuptial Eucharist, and she made her first communion because no church would let us use their facilities.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
when marriage equality became the big news, and those clergy marched out, I wouldn't have any respect because there were two of them said, we'll do it, but it has to be 100 miles from Asheville, and you have to sign an NDA.
What a shame.
And they said, well, he's not really a priest. And that's when that started. And they would tell people that I bought my ordination certificate online. There wasn't any online.
I was going to say back then.
No, I mean, come on. But I would be told that I would get calls in the night, saying you're nothing but a wolf in priest clothing and all this stuff. And we had a small community, about 15 people that would met. And then I started one called the Welcome Table downtown. And I would sit, and this guy made a sign for me. It said, Padres in. And people would come and sit. And, and I had the pastor of one of the largest downtown churches one time stop me. And he said, I see people at that table that would never be in our congregation. Why? And I said, well, Pastor, I never discuss church with these people. I'm here to listen to whatever they want to say. But I said, I'll tell you this much. It ain't got nothing to do with dogma or doctrine. It has everything to do how they have been valued or devalued, ignored or not ignored. That's why they're not sitting there.
Yep.
And one day this guy had the audacity to say to me, when this lady sat at the table, and we had communion on the street, and he said, she's a whore. I said, it's the best kind of people I know. Yeah, I've been a whore myself. I can attest to that. But and I baptized an adult under a tree beside your coffee house. Yeah, she and I still stay in touch. And one of my favorite was there were two young doctors who wanted to get married at All Souls. And Joan, bless her heart, always would say it's easier to get permission than get forgiveness than permission. So they sent out 235 invitations all around the world that they were going to be married at All Souls. Her bishop said, not in, no way, Jose, that ain't going to happen. So Joan said, well, why can't we do it in the parish hall? She said, no, you cannot do it on Episcopal Church property because at that time the Episcopal Church had not changed its position. So he said, call Andrew. So she called me, and we went to the Unitarian Church, and they said, well, normally it'd be an $800 cleaning fee, but since this is a social justice issue, you can do it for free.
Great.
So one of the young women said, what should we wear? I said, keep your money, don't spend it on, it's not a coronation, you're not the princess. I said, do what they did in the early church. When they baptized an adult, you walked into the baptistry stark naked as the day you were born. When you walked out, they clothed you in a white gown called an alb. And Joan can get you those. Well, John wasn't crazy about it, but they loved it. And they saved about $3,500.
Yeah.
And they were in albs, and their best woman was in an alb. And they had, I think it was 63 people showed up.
Wow, that's beautiful.
And they saved that money and went to Honolulu where they started the practice.
That's wonderful. What a rich history that is.
There was a guy at Scandals. Every time John would go to Scandals, he'd say, hey, Father, how many souls did you just save this week? I said, I don't save souls. Only God does that. And I would be asked to do funerals. I did the funeral of the original owner of Scandals. First time I ever kissed a drag queen.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize she was a drag queen after I kissed her on the cheek, but I was they were in the receiving line, and I was kissing and I kissed. I said, good Lord, I just kissed a drag queen. And I did a lot of memorials, even at O. Henry's.
Yeah, well, I think I told you one time when I first moved here, and my first visit to Henry's one afternoon, and they were having a memorial service, and it just caught me off guard,
Yes.
having come from Atlanta and the bar scene and everything
Oh,
like
yeah.
that into Asheville, and I was like, I don't know what I've walked into here, but it also told me a lot about community.
Absolutely.
This community is rich here, it's
Yes, it is.
diverse, and it's vibrant, and it's deep.
Yes, very much so. There's even to talk about the historical Asheville gay community going back to the time of the Vanderbilts.
Really.
Yeah, there used to be a section called Underground Asheville, I think is what it was called. But there was an underground section of the city at the turn of the 20th century. And one of the Vanderbilts would be seen at that bar all the time.
Hmm.
Yeah, I said, see there.
Now you were here in Asheville when I understand there were several gay bars here back then.
Yeah, there was O. Henry's. There was, well, the very first time I was here was O. Henry's, and there was two others. One was on Cherry Street, and there was a third one. I can't remember it, but I remember I was in leather. I had on leather chaps and a leather vest and all. And I walked into it, and I started to leave because people were looking at me like, where did this weird person come from? I said, I don't ride a motorcycle. And I started to leave, and this black lesbian grabbed my arm and said, not yet. Wait till the cops go by.
Oh,
Yeah, and they used that when I first came here, they would take your tag number if you parked at O. Henry's.
really?
Oh, yeah. And then Chief Marino, I think was his name, his sister, I believe, was gay, and he stopped that practice. And going back to the AIDS, when WindCap came along, before WindCap, all the AIDS patients, we had an underground, like you and I were talking about.
Yeah.
So you had the underground drugs because nobody can afford them.
Right.
Some of them hadn't even been approved. And then suddenly the posh and big pillars of the community thought it was okay. And there was a meeting in the Civic Center. And I do tend to get a little passionate sometimes. And I was just getting furious. I was listening to them because it was so clear. It was like, look at me, what I am doing for these poor gay people. And they called on me to comment, which they should not have done. But I said, you didn't give a good goddamn about anybody with AIDS as long as it was a gay person dying. But now that it's the banker's son or the banker's daughter that's getting infected, suddenly you care. So excuse me if you don't have my respect.
Right.
You know. And WindCap got to be very political. And like anything else, not only in gay life, there's always a hierarchy sometimes.
There's always a hierarchy.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't matter what part of life.
Even in closure, I remember one time I was featured in the Asheville Citizen-Times, big old picture of me. And that's when I was still kind of big, a little fat too, but I was big. And the assisting editor, whose last name was Marlowe, and I can't think of her first name, but she said, I want to do an article on you. And they took my picture, and she was talking about me being Bear. And I was at closer, and they saw that it was my picture. And this one guy, who was a real pompous little lady in waiting, said, why is he on the cover? And I said, beats the hell out of me. I don't know. They asked me to be on the cover. And they said, well, we need somebody that's, a little more important.
Oh.
That's serious. And the maddest I ever got them, I shouldn't tell this, but I will. This one guy said, I came out to my grandfather and he won't have anything to do with me. I said, well, that's your grandfather's issue, not yours.
Right.
It's his problem, not your problem. And they were talking about playing down, confrontation. And I said, if you want to be a field you can. I'm not going to be. There's a black kid. And I demand that Bear apologize to the so-and-so.
Right.
He said, he don't owe me an apology. I know exactly what he's trying to say. Quit dancing around like a debutante at a high school ball. I mean, if you dance for the devil, call the devil the devil. This is what kills me today in some of our politics. We need to speak the truth to power, and truth can be inconvenient, it can be uncomfortable, and more often than not, it's offensive.
Yes, very offensive. But we don't own up to that. We don't want to recognize that.
Well, I told the story. I met a survivor of Auschwitz, and she was 10 years old when her family was arrested. And she said that the night before they were taken away, she was able to escape. The parlor doors had been closed and they were having a big family meeting. And she saw cars that she recognized from uncles. And her father and her father's brother were having an argument. And he said, "You have got to leave now. Take the children and leave now before the borders close." And
Mm,
the guy said, "Oh, Hitler is just politically understanding. We
right.
can work with Herr Hitler." She said, "That entire side of my family's dead." And the
Wow.
only reason I survived, she had been told to go to this Christian family that hid her and then a Benedictine convent. And a guy in the village betrayed them, and she was arrested and was in the camp for a year and luckily survived. But she said, "I see the same kind of rhetoric in this country." And that's been 20 years, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And if you ever get a chance, go to the Holocaust Museum. It's haunting. And one thing that you'll go up these steps and you don't realize it, but you're in a cattle car. And it's one of the actual cattle cars. And then you see photographs, and there's a whole section for gay people. And what a lot of gay people don't know about the Holocaust is when the people in the camps were freed, most of the gay men were re-imprisoned.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them
Mm-hmm.
were not free until 1947, even as late as 1950, and treated in many ways worse than even the
When they
Jews
were,
and the Romans.
yes, yes.
And that's what they want in some ways now. There were years ago on US 74 bypass in Shelby, outside Shelby, which is Cleveland County. It's east of here. These two guys that I knew from Atlanta ran an adult bookstore. And one night was going to go down to see them, and something said no to stay. The very next day, came out, these two skinheads had gone in that night that I almost went and shot and killed the two owners, and shot and killed 7 people and shot actually 8. And the only reason the 8th person lived was because somebody saw that there were flames because they had set it afire hoping to cover their
Oh
tracks.
my gosh.
Well, they got their tag number because the adult bookstore had an outdoor camera. Those guys served less than a month because they used the defense that the gay men had made an advance on them.
Something we've heard over and over again in cases, and
Yes,
something that's just so sad for us to continue to live
it
with.
happened in Savannah with a soldier who was on leave, and they beat him so bad that his family couldn't even recognize his face.
Mm.
But like I was telling you, I knew the first person in Atlanta to contract AIDS. Bill was from Wisconsin. His family did not know he was gay, let alone that he was sick. When he died, they would not release his body for over a month. And no mortuary service in Atlanta would take his body back
Mm,
to
mm, mm,
Milwaukee.
mm.
And finally, a friend of his who was able to get a hold of his family, there was an African American funeral home in Milwaukee who said, "We'll come and pick the boy up. We'll prepare him for burial because we know what it's like that even our dead are not respected." And they came and got Bill. And the way I knew about AIDS, there was a young doctor who was also a medical researcher who worked for CDC. And I'll call him Jim. But Jim came in every day for one beer and he'd leave. And he came in one day and he called me over, and I could tell something was really wrong. I said, "What's the matter, Jim?" I said, "You're awfully pensive." He said, "I'm not supposed to tell you, but I'm going to." He said, "I'm flying out to San Francisco tomorrow to a secret conference." He said, "Have you heard of anything that's been going on in New York?" And I said, "Well, I've heard that there's some gay men have been dying in New York." He said, "It's far worse than that." He said, "We don't know what it is. We don't know where it comes from. We don't know how to treat it. We're not even sure how it's transmitted."
Oh.
So he said, "For whatever you do, you be safe." And I said, "Well, what about yourself?" He said, "Well, I've always practiced safe sex." But he said, "We're pretty sure it's transmitted through sexual means." Came back 2 weeks later and told me it was GRID, what they call it. And I began to see people out there. There was approximately 300 to 400 people that I worked with in the bars, and all of them but me had died.
It's amazing to when we look back on those
Oh,
times,
yeah.
and the community that we lost.
Oh, yes,
These
we
were people
did.
that had lives that we will never know how they might have touched other lives.
No. I mean, the scientists we lost, the doctors
Yes.
we lost, the artists we lost, and nobody did care about it. I remember when John and I went to the Quilt in Washington. Well,
Powerful.
oh God, we got on the subway, and it was like 99% gay. And the feeling you had is like, my God, we're a majority here.
Right.
And there was maybe 2 straight people. You knew they were straight because they were so uncomfortable. But it was the most wonderful feeling in the world. And my favorite memory, this sounds so perverse, but it is, we were marching in front of the White House. And there was this young blonde-headed kid, stark naked as the day he was born. He had a thong on, I think, and his cute little butt just shining in the sun. And he was marching in front of the White House. I said, "Oh, I love that. You get to show your ass to the president." And that's been my Pancho Villa days, and I had this Army cadet hat on, and that's when I looked kind of like Pancho Villa because my great-grandmother was African-Cuban.
Okay.
In fact, when I found that out, I had a relative in South Carolina. She was a member of the UDC, the United Daughters of the Confederacy. And she had told everybody that, Grandmother Gentry was actually Cherokee. She was a Cherokee princess. And I said, Eleanor, the Cherokees don't have a monarchy.
Right.
And she was not a princess. And I said, are you standing up? She said, why? I said, you better sit down. She sat down. I could hear her sit. I said, we got the DNA results. I said, we are 98% UK. Then we are West African, Gambian, Congo, and I said Jewish. And I heard this faint, and she never spoke to me again.
Oh, no.
I said, I wanted to say, I do declare.
Had a perfect moment for that statement.
Yeah, my family has been mucking about for years. Whatever can we say about that? And John and I one time were on Ocracoke, and these 2 ladies, I'll never forget them, in a pink Cadillac, pulls up beside this little store. So John and I named them, Miss Magnolia, Sugar Baker, Fusspucker. And we made up this whole story, and I wrote this up in a short story. I said they were the daughter of Senator Fusspucker, and you have to be very careful saying his name or you're going to offend the ladies' auxiliary. So I wrote this whole story with that in there because it's so funny. The hypocrisy of that system,
Yes.
What was the guy's name from South Carolina that had fathered a black child and he was a senator? Oh, what is his name? Thurman.
Yes.
And had a black child, and yet he was against every civil rights thing,
Made no sense.
No.
Bear, I want to thank you. This has been an extremely informative, entertaining, sad in some ways interview, but you have brought so much joy to this, our program, our lives. Part of why I started this was our voices, our stories, they matter. And you have brought so much to the table today and enriched my program that I've started so much. And I'm deeply, deeply grateful and indebted to you for that. And I will never forget this. And I can foresee us having to come back and do another sit down sometime soon.
Oh, that'd be fine. And you honor me more than I deserve.
Oh, no. You deserve every bit of it. You've lived a beautiful life and you're a great person. And I hope that all of this can go out there and many people will listen and learn and experience and relate.
Yeah.
Remember, our stories matter.
Yes, they
matter.
Our
voices matter. You matter. And it's important that we preserve all of this history in Western North Carolina.
Yeah, we can't be silent.
No more silence.
No, shout it from the rooftops.
Thank you.
Thank you.